When people talk about the Pain Assault arc, the conversation usually centers around how powerful it is emotionally or how iconic the fight between Naruto Uzumaki and Pain feels in the moment. But what often gets overlooked is that this arc isn't just trying to impress you, it's trying to challenge you. Because beneath all of the destruction, the speeches, and the spectacle, there's a very specific idea being tested. Not whether Naruto can defeat Pain, but whether Naruto's way of thinking can actually survive in the kind of world the series has spent hundreds of episodes building. And the uncomfortable reality is that for most of this arc, it doesn't. Because for the first time in the story, Naruto isn't facing someone who misunderstands the world, he's facing someone who understands it too well. Nagato, Pain, isn't operating on emotion alone, he's operating on pattern recognition. He's lived through the consequences of the shinobi system, studied them, and come to a conclusion that, at the very least, is internally consistent. And that's what makes this conflict different from anything that comes before it. Because usually, Naruto's opponents are either misguided or consumed by personal hatred, but Pain is neither of those things. He's not confused about how the world works, he's responding to it. To understand why his perspective carries so much weight, you have to look at the foundation of the Naruto world itself. Because despite how it's often framed, the shinobi system isn't designed to create peace, it's designed to manage conflict. Villages like Konohagakure exist as centralized military powers. They take on missions, complete contracts, and maintain influence through strength and reputation. Which means that even during times when there isn't an active war, the entire structure is still built around the assumption that conflict will return. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And that creates a kind of artificial stability, a version of peace that only exists because the conditions for war haven't fully re-emerged yet. From Naruto's perspective, that system works. It gave him a place to belong. It gave him people who acknowledged him. It gave him something to fight for. But from Nagato's perspective, that same system is the reason his life was destroyed before he even had the chance to understand it. Growing up in the Hidden Rain village means existing in a space where the consequences of larger nations' decisions are unavoidable. It's not a place where you debate ideology. It's a place where you survive it. And when Nagato's parents are killed by Leaf Shinobi, it's not framed as a grand moral failure. It's framed as an accident, a mistake made in the chaos of war. But that doesn't change the outcome, because whether something is intentional or not doesn't determine its impact. And this is where one of the core tensions of the arc begins to form, because the same action can be interpreted in completely different ways depending on where you stand. To the Leaf, it's collateral damage. To Nagato, it's the moment everything was taken from him. And the story never fully resolves that contradiction, it just builds on top of it. When Nagato meets Jiraiya, he's introduced to a different way of thinking, one that suggests the world doesn't have to operate this way. That peace isn't just the absence of war, but something that can be actively created through understanding. And for a while, that idea works. Not because it's been proven true, but because it offers something the world hasn't given him yet, hope. Alongside Yahiko and Konan, Nagato begins to believe that it's possible to break out of the cycle he was born into. That if people could just understand each other, truly understand each other, then conflict wouldn't be necessary. But that belief runs into a problem, because it assumes that the world rewards cooperation, and the Naruto world doesn't. It tolerates it at best. Yahiko's dream represents a direct challenge to the existing power structure, a smaller nation trying to establish independence, stability, and unity without relying on the same systems that created conflict in the first place. And that kind of idea is inherently threatening, because if it works, it proves that the current system isn't necessary. So the system responds the way it always does, with force. Yahiko's death isn't just a tragic moment, it's a rejection of the idea he represents. And for Nagato, it forces a shift in perspective that changes everything. Up until that point, he believed that understanding could lead to peace, but now he's faced with a different kind of evidence. Evidence that suggests the opposite, that trying to create peace without power just makes you vulnerable to those who already have it. And this is where his philosophy begins to take shape, not as an emotional reaction, but as a conclusion. Now here's where things get interesting, because Naruto shows up, and for a second, it looks like the story is going to go the usual route. Hero returns, beats the villain, restores order. But that's not what happens. Because Pain doesn't just fight Naruto physically, he corners him ideologically. He basically asks, "What's your solution?" And Naruto doesn't have one, not a real one. Pain lays it out clearly. The cycle of hatred exists. War is constant. People only understand each other through suffering. So create a system where that suffering prevents future conflict. It's brutal, but it's consistent. Naruto's response? I'll find another way. That's not an answer. That's a promise. And there's a difference. Now let's talk about the Hinata moment, because this is where the arc exposes Naruto completely. When Hinata Hyuga steps in and gets taken out, Naruto loses it completely. No philosophy, no ideals, just rage. And in that moment, Pain is proven right, because Naruto, the guy who's supposed to break the cycle, falls into it instantly. He becomes exactly what pain predicts people will become when they experience real loss. That's not a small detail, that's the entire argument. The only reason Naruto doesn't stay there is because of outside intervention. Minato Namikaze steps in and pulls him back, which raises a question people don't like asking. If Naruto needed help to not become what Pain said he would, then how strong is his ideology really? So by the time Naruto actually talks to Nagato, the fight is already decided physically. What's left is the argument. And this is where the arc takes a risk, because Naruto doesn't beat Pain logically. He doesn't dismantle the system. He doesn't propose a better structure. He basically says, I know the world is broken, but I'm not going to give up on it. That's it. That's his answer. And somehow, that works. Now let's be clear, Naruto doesn't prove Pain wrong. He proves something else, that Pain might not be completely right. And that's enough to create doubt, enough for Nagato to hesitate, enough for him to take a risk. And that's why he uses Rin Rebirth, not because Naruto solved the problem, but because he reminded Nagato of something he lost, hope. And this is where the arc becomes controversial, because depending on how you look at it, this is either brilliant or completely unsatisfying. On one hand, it's realistic. Big systemic problems don't get solved in one conversation. On the other hand, Naruto never actually answers the question Pain asked. He just refuses to accept the conclusion. And that's why this arc hits so hard, because it exposes something about Naruto as a character. He's not someone who understands the world better than everyone else. He's someone who refuses to let the world define him. And that's powerful, but it's not the same as being right. So when people say Pain is one of the best villains in anime, it's not because he was strong. It's because he forced the story into a position where it had to confront its own flaws. And even at the end, those flaws are still there. The system still exists. The cycle of hatred isn't broken. Naruto didn't fix the world. He just chose to believe it could be fixed. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Pain represents reality. Naruto represents possibility. And the story never fully proves which one wins.